Today, we're diving deep into a really complex and often misunderstood form of psychological trauma, narcissistic abuse. It's this kind of wound that doesn't leave a visible scar, but its impact can be absolutely devastating and can last a lifetime. And that really brings us to the central question of this whole explainer. How is it possible? How can abuse with no physical marks, nothing you can point to, leave such incredibly deep, lasting scars? The answer, as we'll see, is all about how sneaky and gradual it is. This quote really just says it all, doesn't it? This isn't about one bad fight or a single traumatic event. No, this is a slow burn. It's a corrosive process that piece by piece dismantles a person's entire sense of who they are and what is real. So let's start with this first big idea, the invisibility of the trauma. And this is key because it's exactly what makes narcissistic abuse so incredibly hard to spot, not just for the person going through it, but for everyone on the outside looking in. Yeah, and this sets up a really painful situation. On the outside, friends and family might not see anything wrong. They might even think the relationship looks great. But on the inside, the victim is living in this constant state of high alert, this exhausting tension, always walking on eggshells, just waiting for that next subtle jab or emotional attack. Now, what happens when someone lives with that kind of chronic stress day in and day out? Well, it builds into something that's clinically diagnosable. See, being exposed to this for a long time doesn't just feel bad. It can actually start to rewire the brain's entire stress response system. And that brings us to a really crucial distinction: PTSD versus what's called complex PTSD, or C-PTSD. Now, you've probably heard of PTSD on the left. It's often tied to a single major traumatic event. But C-PTSD, over on the right, is different. It's the result of repeated long-term trauma, which is exactly what we see in these kinds of relationships. It has all the symptoms of PTSD, but then it piles on even more. Serious trouble regulating emotions, a constant nagging sense of shame and guilt, a completely shattered self-image, and a deep, deep inability to trust anyone. And here's the core of the problem. Because the aggression is emotional, not physical, it's often disguised as something else, like concern or even love. I'm just saying this because I care about you. Because of that, a victim can go for years, literally years, without even having the words to describe what they're experiencing as trauma. And that lack of validation, both from themselves and from others, is a huge barrier to ever getting help. So when this trauma goes on and on, unacknowledged, it inevitably causes this gradual but really severe decline, not just in a person's emotional health, but in their very sense of who they are. So let's look at the emotional fallout. You've got this constant criticism, this constant feeling of being devalued. Of course, that's going to fuel depression and rock-bottom self-esteem. And the total unpredictability of the abuser, where you never know what's going to set them off, that creates this state of chronic, unending anxiety. The person gets trapped in this horrible feedback loop of fear and hopelessness. But maybe the most devastating result of all is what we call the erosion of identity. And this goes so much deeper than just feeling bad about yourself. To survive, to keep the peace, the victim slowly starts to let go of their own opinions, their hobbies, their dreams, and they replace them with whatever the abuser wants. They literally lose their authentic self, and what's left is just this profound sense of emptiness. They don't even know who they are anymore. So you have to be asking, how does an abuser get this much control? Well, it's not by accident. It's the result of some very specific and very powerful psychological tactics that are used to systematically manipulate and control the victim. Okay, first up is a big one: cognitive dissonance. This is the intense mental stress you feel when you're trying to hold two completely contradictory beliefs at the same time. For instance, my partner is the most charming, loving person I've ever met, and my partner is incredibly cruel and says horrible things to me. The brain just can't handle that conflict. So to get rid of the discomfort, it has to explain away the bad stuff. Oh, they're just stressed, or they didn't really mean it. You start clinging to the good moments because it's just too painful to accept the truth. Next, we have something called trauma bonding. And let's be crystal clear, this is not love. It's a really powerful, intense, emotional attachment that gets forged through a cycle of abuse followed by moments of affection. That little bit of kindness after a period of cruelty, it's like a drug. It triggers a huge rush of relief and hope in the brain, creating this deep-seated belief that things can get better.
It's that hope that keeps the person emotionally chained to the abuser.
And what fuels that trauma bond is a mechanism called intermittent reinforcement. Honestly, it works exactly like a slot machine. The rewards, whether it's affection or praise, they're given out completely randomly. And because you never know when the next payout is coming, you just keep trying. You stay in a constant state of hope and anticipation. And here's the paradox. It's that very unpredictability that makes the bond so incredibly powerful and addictive.
All right, and this is maybe the most important piece of the puzzle. None of these mechanisms work in a vacuum. Their real power, their truly devastating power, comes from how they all lock together and reinforce each other, creating something that feels impossible to escape.
The end result is what our source material calls an invisible prison. It has no physical walls, no bars you can touch, but it is terrifyingly effective at keeping someone trapped.
So let's look at the bars that make up this prison. They all work together. Cognitive dissonance is the blindfold. It stops the victim from seeing the reality of the abuse. That confusion is then amplified by gaslighting, where the abuser makes them doubt their own mind. At the same time, trauma bonding forges these powerful emotional chains, which are then made addictive through intermittent reinforcement. The abuser then pushes for social isolation, cutting the victim off from anyone who might offer a different perspective. And finally, with their identity completely eroded, the very person who would have the strength to leave is gone. It's this whole interlocking system that makes escape feel almost impossible.
It is a devastatingly effective trap. And it's so effective because it's not built around the victim. It's built inside the victim's own mind. Which leaves us with a final haunting question. If the prison itself is invisible, made of thoughts and twisted emotions, where on earth do you even begin to look for the key?